In this video, we're answering the question for all the teachers, parents, and students out there who may not be percussion specialists. What core skill sets should you be practicing to build your marching percussion foundation? Hey, what's up guys? Huei-Yuan coming to you from Cupertino, California. Today we're answering a question from Ask Huei. This question comes from Bert. Bert says, "Hi Huei, I'm a band director with no drum corps experience. I need advice on how to sequence a set of exercises for off-season development of a novice drumline. In other words, how would you approach starting a workout program for the off-season designed specifically for marching percussion?" So Bert, this is a great question. It's a question that I spent a lot of time thinking about, not only as a player, but also as a teacher. You know, when you're a player, you just basically do what your teacher tells you to do. When you're a teacher, you're the one that's having to construct the program, the exercises, the routine for your students so that they're developing those correct skill sets. Before we talk about the actual skill sets in this video, and I'll go through some of the exercises, things that you want to look for, things that you can actually comment on, one of the things that I just want to mention is if you look at the big boy, big girl programs that are playing at a really extreme level, a lot of times you'll see the simplicity of the exercises is where the magic is happening. I think a lot of times, especially when I was a younger educator, I would want to play really complicated exercises. But I think when you have a really basic, simple exercise, that's what allows you to play them at a really high level and then approach that desired goal of getting to a point of perfection, right? The better and more perfect you can play those basic exercises, that's going to allow you to transfer that level of perfection to the more challenging music as you scaffold your way up to that point. So with that being said, let's get into these basic exercises. The one caveat that I also want to throw out before we get started is that these exercises should be played at a variety of tempos and dynamic levels. So for brevity's sake, I'm just going to play them at one dynamic level, at one tempo. Metronome's at 100 right now. But as a teacher, you want to make sure that you work these through forte, mezzo forte, piano, pianissimo, fortissimo, all the dynamic ranges, and through a variety of tempos that suit your students. So the first exercise will be very familiar for all the percussionists out there, but let me point out a few things that you want to look for. So this first exercise is going to be 16 on a hand. You simply just play 16th, 8th notes on each hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're able to teach your students about eighth note notation, how they can count them and feel it in their head. While the exercise itself might be simple, there are three things that you really want to look for as you're playing this exercise. The first thing is that the stick motion is smooth and legato. If you see any sort of rigidity in the stroke, like this, or you hear that sound getting choked off, it might mean they're squeezing the stick too tightly, or the stick motion is too much of a down motion. You've got to figure out how to make the motion of the stick smooth. It looks really simple, but this is going to take a long time to develop, and this is one of those things that takes a little bit every day over time, and you work to develop this smooth motion. Some people, this comes very naturally. For some people, they have to work really hard at it. If it doesn't come right away, just be patient with yourself and keep working on it, especially in front of a mirror. Number two, you're making sure that your stick is going straight up and down. So you want to ensure that there isn't any slicing occurring where you're slicing out this way or slicing in towards your body. And the way you do that is you'll use a mirror. If I use the camera as a mirror right now, a lot of times you'll see beginners as they do this. When you tell them about this concept, you'll see them kind of squish their arm to try to point their stick into the mirror. Instead, just make sure that they're set up perfectly and then have them take a step to the left, and then now their stick is pointing into the mirror. And so you can check your right hand, and then the same thing for the left hand. You're going to take a step to your right, have your left stick pointing into the mirror so that you can check for that slice. Having your stick going straight up and down, super, super important. And number three, for most people when they start playing, they're gonna wanna play with this arm motion. So if they have long sleeves on, have them roll their sleeves up, and you're looking for their wrist. You actually point out to them and say, hey, look right here as you're playing. Make sure that your primary lever that you're using is coming from the wrist. And again, this comes a little bit more naturally for some than others, but that knocking motion is what you're trying to help them develop. Even at the lower dynamics at piano, you can see that there's a slight wrist motion. And then the higher you play, that's how you get more volume as you're playing. The second exercise you're going to want to take a look at is some sort of timing exercise. I find that a lot of the clarity issues that arise in the more complicated passages actually stem from inconsistencies in people's basic timing interpretation. So a basic 16th note time exercise will help you start to unify that and train that with your students. So this is like a stock 16th note timing exercise. I think this is the first one that I learned growing up in middle school, high school, but I've made some adaptations and I'll explain here, but let me just play it first. I'll explain what we're doing, okay? So it starts with a 4-count check, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Check again, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. Check again, 1E, a 2E, a 3E, a 4E, a 1. E and a, E and a, E and a, E and a 1. Now, if this is too fast, which this will be for most people, if this is the first time they're seeing this pattern, especially when they get to the second half, the E and a, or the 1E patterns, you can slow this way down just until they get the sticking down in the coordination, right? But a couple things that you're looking for. Typically, you'll see this exercise where it's 1E and first, and then 1E and then 1 and then E and. Like the order of the patterns is switched. The reason I order it with 1E and 1 and first is you'll notice the first half of the exercise, you're still able to talk to your students about that right hand flow. If you watch my right hand, it's just playing 16 on the hand the whole time. And conversely, the second half of the exercise, it's left hand flow the whole time. So there shouldn't be any stopping of the stick, especially when you get to those last two patterns, 1E, any of those syncopated patterns. People want to stop the stick in kind of a strange place. So you're talking to your students about flow, sound quality, all the things that you talk about during 16 on a hand apply to this exercise. Secondly, this is a great opportunity to very slowly start teaching your students how their feet should be syncopating with their hands. So if you're playing 1E and 2E and, no problem, it's right on the downbeat. 1 and a 2 and also usually no problem. Then when you get to the 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, 1, you know, you want to take it beat by beat. So it's 1E, 2. So you can figure out how your hands and your feet work. And then you get to the last one, which is really fun. Your feet actually fill in the gap. It's E and E and E and E and, right? And helping your students figure out that coordination now is going to be a huge foot timing strengthener as they get to more complicated patterns later. From here, I would work some sort of double exercise. You know, so much of what we play as percussionists, it requires us to do various stickings. So the ability to play two notes of equal height, equal volume, that comes from sort of basic double beat exercise. You'll see a lot of people play like a Sanford double beat. The thing that I would caution about any double beat exercise you play, just make sure that you're stressing the purpose behind the exercise. As you're playing double beat, it's not just about playing the right rhythm and kind of getting your feet and your hands together. You're specifically working on making that second note equal in volume and height as your first note. Right? And what I find is that you usually have to start way slower than you think to teach students how to do this. So there's actually an exercise that I usually go with. It's called gallop. And I would start, if we had the metronome at 100, if this is a beginning line, I would literally start half tempo and go. Because at this point, you know your students can already play, right? So you're just teaching them how to play two notes, and the stroke type is, at this tempo, would be a full stroke, downstroke, full, down, and that stroke's a downstroke, obviously. And then on the other hand, down, full, down, full, down, full. So you can talk about the stroke types, where the stick is starting and ending. You're reminding them not to squeeze the stick too tight. You're reminding them not to squeeze the stick too tight so that they're still getting a full and open sound. All the timing issues, and there's a lot of space, and so they're able to coordinate their feet and their hand and work on their timing so that they're not rushing that eighth note space between and then coming in early right there. So many things to talk about with such a basic exercise. Eventually you would ramp up the tempo by 4 or 8 beat increments, and then you would eventually get to 200, which, you know, double time would be this 100 tempo that we're at, and then it would look like this. Add a roll. So you can see how very quickly we're working our way up to to a double stroke roll. But there are a couple more steps that you want to take before you get to that point. The next exercise that every percussionist needs to work at some point is some sort of accent tap or bucks exercise. So this is where you're moving from a accented or loud note down to a softer or lower volume note, right? And so typically you'll see people play bucks twos like this. You'll do that same right hand, left hand stop format. You'll do bucks threes. In this instance, people would typically want to jump fast on that second note. They'll go 1 and 2 and 3 and they'll want to go fast because it's not stable, it's on the upbeat. And then of course, bucks fours. And again, right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. Now the teaching tip here is a lot of times as soon as you get to this accent tap, people immediately want to squeeze the stick. I definitely had this issue when I was in high school and college. I would want to squeeze the stick in order to keep it down. And so the goal that we're always working towards as percussionists and as musicians is how do we maintain that same level of sound quality regardless of if it's an accent or if it's a tap, right? So what you can do is you juxtapose that 60 on a hand, you've got that great flow and that legato motion, soft hands as you're playing this, and you put that directly against this accent tap pattern. So you could play something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, down. So what you're doing is you're reminding the students, and they're working this. What you don't want to hear is 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, da, da, da. You don't want that wham or that accented note to jump out. You want that note to sound just like all the notes that precede it. And as you're playing that low 3-inch piano note, you're thinking about sound quality, how to get a fuller sound from the instrument, and that you're not feather tapping as you're playing this, right? And then from there, you start to condense the space between the accented notes and the non-accented notes. So it might look something like this. Those two variations start to set you up for those bucks fours, bucks threes, and bucks twos. But if you take this preliminary step, it'll hopefully help you avoid some of that squeezing, slamming that occurs when you jump right into bucks fours, bucks threes, and bucks twos. Definitely use those fours, threes, and twos patterns, but this might just be a primer that you can use before you jump into those patterns. Exercise number 5, this is the part where it starts getting really fun for the drummers because this is how you start impressing the people who aren't drummers, but we start playing some sort of roll exercise. This is probably one of the first 16th note exercises that I learned, and at Forte it would look something like this. If you played it in a piano dynamic, it would look like this. You get out a tap roll. Just with that exercise and those two basic variations, you're introducing a lot of great information. But what you want to point out to your students is this all stems from those basic exercises that we were just working. So if you isolate the hands, we have, right, you're just playing 16 on a hand at 3 inches, right? And you're trying to work this double. This is where it differs from the double beat exercise, is we're incorporating a little bit of bounce, where the stick is just bouncing twice. They're learning how to utilize that fulcrum to get that bounce. Much later, you talk to the advanced players about how you can use those back fingers to beefing up that low end. But for now, they're just learning how to bounce the stick so they get 2 distinct notes. And then when you get to the tap roll, there's that accent tap that we were working earlier, right? So it's a all the drumming skill sets, and this is part of maybe what attracted me to drumming when I was younger, is that the skill sets are cumulative. As you master one, you start layering on the demand or the challenges that are required. And if you don't have one skill set down, those flaws are going to show up in those later exercises. So it's like you're mastering all these specific parts of your drumming, and then when you put them all together, you get to start playing all this really fun and cool stuff, right? Chicken in a roll, this is duple based. I would also encourage some sort of triplet based exercise as you're getting faster. You could play it in that same format where it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Some sort of triplet based exercise. And there's also, I mean, there's literally 1,000 variations on triplet roll, but if you want to utilize the same format, you can just play it over a triplet feel. The last core skill set that you're going to want to address at some point is developing flams within your players. This is important not only for marching percussion, but also in your concert percussion skills. Learning how to play a great flam. I'll link up a video over here that I've done for all state auditions on how to play a flam. But in short, you've got a grace note and a primary note, and you just want to make sure that you can get consistent spacing in that between the grace note and the primary note. Same thing on your left hand. I mean, how many people out there, myself included when I first started, had stronger right hand flams or left hand flams, right? You're always gonna have one hand that's better at playing flams, and your goal is to make that weaker hand just as great as your right hand. From here, there are a number of exercises and breakdowns that you can play to work on the most common flam rudiments. So you've got your flam accents, your flam taps, but a basic pattern that you can play is just an A-B pattern. So it's a check pattern format. So in this instance, the check would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and the pattern would be a flam accent sticking, which is flam accent, flam accent, flam accent, flam accent. We're gonna put this over that same duple feel here at 100, and it would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and flam accent, flam accent, flam accent, flam accent. What you're looking for is that the stick heights, clarity of height, and the rhythm and the timing doesn't change just because you're adding that grace note, right? If you look at my stick motion and hit mute, you may not even know that I'm playing flam accents, but you can hear it, right? What you're avoiding, which is very common with flam accents, is they play a great check. They could probably do this if they've got great accent tap at this point and great 16 on a hand. They're probably able to do this really well. And then as soon as you say, hey, play flam accents, they do this. It's this wacky, crazy sticking that they're doing, and you're just like, hey, it's really no big deal. It's just this motion, and then we're just adding that grace note. And the reason we're putting it over this duple feel is it helps you avoid some of those timing issues that are associated with triplets. You know, if I back this down to, let's say, and this is slow, right? If I put this at 70, ba bo bo ba bo bo. For most young players, they're gonna rush as they get to each one of those slams. The tempo's gonna push forward. So putting it over a duple feel just helps them square off the rhythm, more rhythmically accurate, so that when you do get faster, you won't have that strange morphing that takes place when you're playing over a triplet feel. So those are the core skill sets and some examples of exercises that you can be playing in the off season. But one thing I want to encourage all the teachers out there is, yes, you have to create a roadmap for your students, but I've found that anytime you can create more of a runway, meaning you're giving them the first 5 or 6 steps, but then you're paving the way for them to do their own exploration, their own seeking out of information. When they're self-directing their learning, they're gonna end up surprising you, many times I've found, with things that you didn't think to introduce to them or a thing that sparks their interest, right? So one thing that you can do is really encourage the students to be attending their own shows, maybe assigning some sort of YouTube assignment where you tell them to go explore certain groups that you think are good examples of what they're hoping to attain. You know, they have to have a really clear and vivid idea of what should it look and sound like. What is it that we're working towards? You can explain all day until you're blue in the face what it's supposed to look and sound like, but if they just see a video of it, which is the power of technology now, a lot of times that'll give them that spark of going like, oh, I want it to look and sound like that. It gives them that carrot to work towards. The second thing is, once they've learned these exercises, you can shoot a baseline video. You know, shooting video of your students or having your students shoot their own video is such a powerful tool. So let's say you identify these skill sets as being your 6 core exercises. You add 1 or 2, then you've got 8. Have them shoot a video of themselves playing this in October or November, and you say, hey gang, In April or May, when we have our Drumline auditions for next year, we're gonna play these same exercises. So we're gonna shoot a video of ourselves now, and then we're gonna shoot videos again in April and May. And in between, you should be shooting more videos so that you can see that progression of yourself from when you started to where you ended up 6, 8, 10 months later. That documentation of where you're at that moment is so motivating, because when they see themselves, they'll be able to start to point out like, okay, that doesn't look the same as when I watched the video of this top tier group over here. How do I make myself look and sound like that over here? So you're starting to give them those analytical tools for their eyes and their ears. They're able to at home, again, self-direct their own learning process. I also want to mention that as much as I love marching percussion, I mean, really, I seriously loved marching percussion when I was in high school, and it was the catalyst for a lot of the practice that I did. You know, I was so fortunate early on to have teachers that required me to play in percussion ensemble, or to take all-state auditions and work on those concert percussion etudes, or to play in the jazz ensemble. Any manner of playing percussion, whether it's in marching percussion or all the other genres of playing, is just gonna make them a better marching percussionist. So I would say in your pursuit to make a really great marching percussion ensemble, don't neglect those other areas where your students are developing as musicians and players. I also want to mention that as a music teacher or as a musician, anytime you can relate the technical details of what you're doing back to musically why you're doing it, sound quality, posture, rhythms, listening, ear training, dynamics, all those things are just making your students better musicians. And while you may not know all the technical things that you need to be saying or doing as a percussion specialist, just continue seeking out resources online or talking to percussion friends, and those skill sets will come with time. But when it comes to music, you know music, just always relate what you're doing back to being a great musician. My last tip is one of the best things you can do is to customize these exercises for your own situation. You know, I've given you 6 examples of 6 exercises. There's an endless number of variations on these exercises, and for you to be able to customize them by adding a chag, or doing them 4 times in a row, or just zooming in and doing one pattern 4 times, doing the triplet version of the 16th note version, doing them backwards. There's so many ways that you can tailor these exercises for your students, and the most important thing is that as the teacher, you're gonna know best what your students need. So don't be afraid to customize these exercises for your program and your students. As important as these exercises are, it still takes the critical thinking on the teacher and student's part to look at what is the deficiency that I'm trying to remediate, and what are the exercises that I need to do to start getting closer to my desired outcome. If you have a core exercise that you think is part of this routine that you like to use, do us a favor by leaving that down below in the comments. And if you have a follow-up question that you would like answered, leave that also down below in the comments. Maybe this is a part 1 of a series of part 2, part 3. This is just about getting some more information and resources out there for people who are looking to advance their playing and their teaching. I'm gonna leave some links in the description down below for some additional resources that you might wanna check out. First up, we have our Drumline Blueprint Complete video course, which goes into all these topics, but in a lot more detail. There's also a private community for those members. There's also some text and music content available. My Marching Percussion Playbook is the text and music resource that I use with all my private students so that I can really zoom in and have a paper example of all the exercises that I use. But I also want to make sure that there's something for everybody. So down below in the description, there's a free PDF that you can download. The musical examples of these 6 core skill sets are in that handout, along with many other free handouts which you can find on my website, huei-yuan.com/free lessons. Thank you to all the new and recent subscribers. I'm really trying to make a concerted effort at being more consistent with these teaching videos. I love making for them, you guys, and when you send your social media notes, those really mean a lot to me. So thanks for watching the video. We'll see you in the next one. Bye. So you play that 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and. And then we're gonna play the 1 and a pattern. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. Okay, let me demonstrate this with the metronome. Come on, man.